We're live now. Welcome, everyone. I'm Peter Morrison, co-president of the Nantucket Civic League. Meet the Articles is our signature annual forum produced with NCTV aid assistance. Our aim is to help you, our attendees and viewers, inform yourselves as voters at next month's annual town meeting on May 7th. A volunteer team of our executive committee members patiently culled through the articles on the town warrant. They've identified key articles deserving your attention. For citizen articles, you'll hear the proponent's perspective along with alternative perspectives. I'll now introduce our moderator, Vice President Scott Wilson. Over to you, Scott.
Peter, he needs to unmute.
Scott, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
I'm Scott Wilson. I'm the vice president of the Nantucket Civic League, and I'm also the president of the Shop Homeowners Association here on Nantucket. We'd like to thank you all in advance for our panelists, including town manager Libby Gibson and her team, who are available on this springtime Saturday to answer your questions. Those of you on Zoom can submit brief written questions via the chat feature on your screen. Simply click the chat button at the bottom of your screen and type your question into the box, then click the submit button. My executive committee colleague, Gail Walker, will be helping me sort through your questions. We do, however, have two requests regarding your questions. First, please align your written questions with our program. A question you submit should pertain to the topics we are then discussing. For the manager's overview, you can start submitting your questions now, but please wait until we've advanced to the next block of issues before submitting written questions about Articles 38, 42, 68, and 69, and then the short-term rental articles. Secondly, please try to keep your questions concise and polite, and please don't send us any advocacy pieces, questions only. The Civic League is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation and is a nonpartisan organization. Our mission is to inform the public. We do not allow ad hominem remarks, and we will only read questions that go to an issue itself, not those that are critical of any person or official. We appreciate your attendance and participation. A recording of this forum will be immediately available for subsequent on-demand viewing on YouTube. And we thank NCTV 8 for their invaluable logistical support. So we're ready to begin. Our forum is in three parts, each followed by a question and answer opportunity. First will be a discussion by town manager Libby Gibson and her team on 8 important appropriation or land purchase articles, after which we will give them a chance to answer your questions. Following that Q&A, we'll turn to the second part of today's forum. For each of those 4 articles, you'll hear from the presenter for 2 to 3 minutes, and then from another speaker whom we've invited to add further perspective to that presentation. Thereafter, we've allowed some time for those speakers to answer your written questions. And then after that, we'll turn to the short-term rental issue for the final portion of our forum. I'll now call upon Town Manager Libby Gibson for an overview of this town's annual meeting. Libby, over to you.
Thank you so much. We're pleased to be here. We always appreciate this opportunity to review town initiatives and warrant articles. So our articles today are listed on the program. We're going to be reviewing 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 19, and 38. I believe those are, and also 68 and 69. So specifically, we're going to divide our articles up a little bit. I'm going to do some, the finance director will do some, and our DPW director and so on. So I'm going to start with Article 11. And as a point of information, all but one of the articles that we appropriation articles, that is, that we will be reviewing are subject to additional confirmatory votes at the May 21st annual town election, and that is Article 19. Article 11 relates to a town employee housing and funding for feasibility reviews of town property. This is also ballot question number 1. Article 11 seeks $3 million for feasibility, design, and permitting for employee housing on various town-owned properties to support the Select Board strategic plan priority to create affordable housing to attract and retain municipal employees. The town owns several properties which may be suitable for employee housing. Each has unique characteristics which may or may not suit the mix of housing the town requires. The town is actively acquiring properties, some with existing housing structures. Tentative acquisition of one particular property, 31 Western Avenue, the subject of Article 12, we'll get to in a second, may also impact the type and location of additional housing we will need to build. The dynamic nature of both the acquisitions and the employee housing needs require maximum planning flexibility. While Tacoma Way remains our probable site for use of the funds, we are also considering building on other town-owned properties. Okay, to move on to the next one?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Article 12 relates to the acquisition of 31 Western Avenue. This is the site of the former Star of the Sea Youth Hostel. It's also ballot question number 2. Article 12 does not yet have a Finance Committee motion. The article seeks an appropriation to acquire the property at 31 Western. The Select Board has executed a purchase and sale agreement for the property in the amount of $6 million. It's contingent upon the approval of town meeting and obviously the ballot. The Finance Committee hasn't made its motion yet because we are awaiting a cost estimate to bring the property permanently up to code for habitation purposes, as well as to meet the conditions of a historic preservation restriction which covers the property. We expect that estimate in the next couple of weeks, and we expect the Finance Committee to make its motion prior to town meeting. Article 13 is a supplemental appropriation for the Public Works facility. This is a new facility located at a different site than it is now, and our DPW Director, Drew Patnode, is going to take this one. Drew?
Thanks, Libby. Article 13 at the 2024 annual town meeting seeks $1.2 million in supplemental funding for the design of a new public works facility. This request aligns with the Select Board's strategic plan for efficient and effective town operations, particularly in the maintenance and improvement of municipal infrastructure. It also supports the Select Board strategic plan focus area of environmental leadership with its proposed location on town-owned property at Shadbush Road, addressing coastal resilience planning and hazard mitigation. Article 16 of the 2018 annual town meeting appropriated $2.3 million for the planning, design, permitting, and other professional services associated with the development of a new DPW facility at 188 Nantucket Road. That appropriation has since been amended twice, Article 17 at the 2023 annual town meeting to include 10 Sun Island Road, and Article 15 at the 2023 special town meeting to include 1 Shadbush Road as potential locations for the new DPW facility. To date, $677,000 has been expended or encumbered through contracts. Tasks completed to date include a feasibility study that thoroughly examined all 3 locations, conducting for each site a climate vulnerability assessment and development of resilient design criteria, site evaluations and conceptual layout plans, environmental and endangered species assessments, cost analyses, and a comparison of the 3 potential locations for site selection. Over the last 6 months, we've also completed the DPW program confirmation and departmental needs assessment as part of the preliminary design phase, which conducted an extensive review of DPW operations, facilities, and assets. A preferred schematic design of the new DPW facility to be located at 1 Shadbush Road has been selected after thoughtful development of a site plan and building layout. This article seeks to appropriate the funding necessary to complete the final design phase, which will build upon the schematic design of the facility, develop bid-ready documents, and bid the project for construction. The request supports the town's long-term operational and environmental objectives by designing a sustainable, code-compliant, efficient facility to serve the needs of the community for at least the next 50 years. Next, I'm also going to speak on Articles 14, 15, and 16. So Article 14 is supplemental funding for the improvements to Newtown Road. The project supports the Select Board's strategic plan, transportation focus area, goal number 1 of creating a complete network of sidewalks and multi-use paths that would allow people living in Mid-Island and in the downtown core to access a full range of services without the need for a car. Improvements constructed as part of this project provide facilities necessary for alternative modes of transportation, and in conjunction with other completed and proposed projects, provides a safe corridor from Fairgrounds Road and the Public Safety Complex to the Mid-Island Rotary, Public School Campus, and the Nantucket Cottage Hospital. All aspects of this project contribute to improved safety and functionality within the public right-of-way. This project would create a shared use path through a heavily traveled corridor where no sidewalk currently exists. The design adds vertical and horizontal separation between motor vehicles and users of the path and improves the existing roadway by enhancing the subbase, replacing deteriorated pavement, and an installation of appropriate speed humps. A vehicle pull-off for children drop-off and pickup and improvements to drainage infrastructure are also included in the scope of this project. Article 11 at the 2021 annual town meeting appropriated $1.2 million for the design and construction of Newtown Road transportation improvements. To date, $246,000 has been expended or encumbered through contracts for design, bidding, and construction engineering oversight. This article proposes allocating $2 million towards the construction phase of this project. The original cost estimate developed prior to the 2021 annual town meeting was not based on an actual design and was calculated using what are now 4-year-old unit prices. A recent cost estimate was developed based on the 90% design submittal and calculated using recent as-bid pricing. This latest cost estimate, totaling $2.7 million, proved that additional funding would be required to construct the project. Next is Article 15. The scope of Article 15 includes the removal of debris from the beach and bluff area, controlling erosion, and restoring dunes at Tom Nevers Park, the former Navy base, with an appropriation of $2 million. These efforts are in line with the Select Board's strategic planning objectives, focusing on efficient and effective town operations and environmental leadership. The goal is to maintain our municipal infrastructure while also preparing for and mitigating coastal environmental challenges. This initiative demonstrates a commitment to enhancing our community's recreational facilities and ecological sustainability. To date, $42,000 has been spent on the embankment restoration design, utilizing funding available from Article 14 of the 2019 annual town meeting for the Tom Nevers Master Plan. In addition to construction funds, the appropriation being requested is needed to revise the current design, which is now necessary because of dramatic changes to the bluff from storms in December and January of this past winter. Additionally, considerable permitting will be required through our local Conservation Commission, the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management, or CZM, and the Army Corps of Engineers. And next, I'll speak on Article 16, the expansion of lined landfill, Cell 3B. Article 16 addresses a critical need for our community's solid waste management infrastructure. This article supports the Select Board's strategic plan environmental leadership focus area as it relates to implementing data-driven recommendations on island-wide solid waste management. The proposal calls for an investment of $5,060,000 to fund design, permitting, and construction of a new lined landfill cell. This appropriation would ensure that our community can continue to manage its waste responsibly without compromising our environmental values. The active lined landfill cell, Cell 3A, receives approximately 6,000 cubic yards of residuals from the composter each year. Based on this data and recent drone survey results, it is anticipated that Cell 3A could be out of airspace and unable to receive waste as early as the middle of 2026. As such, there is a need to expand the landfill and construct an adjacent lined landfill cell, Cell 3B. Cell 3B was originally designed in conjunction with Cell 3A in 2000, then called Cell 3AB. That design was reviewed by Mass DEP, but Cell 3B was not permitted at the time because it was not going to be constructed immediately. The design for Cell 3B is approximately 47,000 square feet with a capacity to manage up to 70,000 cubic yards of waste and is dependent upon permit approval by Mass DEP. Based on current disposal data, the new cell 3B would have an estimated useful life of about 11 and a half years. And that's all I have for Public Works. Article 17 is,
I don't,
sorry, I
don't
can't get
think
to
we're, it's okay,
I'm
Drew,
sorry.
I don't think we're doing.
18.
18 is the Public Safety Auxiliary Building, and the fire chief is going to take us through this. And he is at his Saturday class. He's working to get certified as a paramedic. Thank you, Mike. It's a really tough course, and he's there every Saturday. He's been there for months, and so.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Libby. Thank you, everyone. So Article 18 proposes the construction of a modular storage building of approximately 4,000 square feet to be located behind the public safety complex at 4 Fairgrounds Road. Designed specifically for the police and fire departments, this structure will securely house essential supplementary equipment vulnerable to environmental factors. The list of equipment to be stored includes brush fire response tankers and equipment, utility vehicles, inventory of tires, a foam trailer, snow plows, recovered property storage from the police, a mobile command post, emergency lighting and generator trailers, beach patrol ATVs, maintenance items, and specialized trailers. Currently, the equipment is stored across various locations on the island, making quick access difficult during emergencies. Much of it is stored outdoors, leading to wear and tear that compromises the functionality and the lifespan of the equipment. Keeping this equipment in a dedicated covered space will prolong its life, simplify maintenance, and ensure easy access. This article proposes allocating $5 million towards the construction phase of this project. And then I could give you a little bit of a background on the history of this project. So during the 2009 year, when the planning process was underway for a new public safety facility, this was brought up. So in the early stages of that process, there was an identification made of equipment that needed immediate access to or readily access to. So the equipment that needed immediate access, it was decided that it would be housed inside the base buildings of the police and fire department. The readily access equipment would be stored in this outbuilding. In 2009, the decision was made that the police and fire public safety would not be built as a combined effort in the police department. Was decided on that building would be built first. The outbuilding was going to be included as part of that, but when the bids came back, it was over the cost of what the bid allowance was. So at that point, it was decided that when the fire department part of the building was going to be built, it would be included in that part of the bid as well. But again, the same thing happened when the fire department passed. The bid came back too high, so that outbuilding was again pushed off. So this has been going on for a while, but there is a very real need for it to store our equipment. The price of our equipment is going up exponentially every year. And when we have to store it at various locations, in many cases, we have to leave it outside. It just shortens the life expectancy of the equipment and increases our cost of repair and maintenance on the equipment. So that's a little bit of the history of it. That's why we're now at where we are trying to put this forward as a single proposed outbuilding.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chief. Next, we have Article 19, which the Finance Director is going to take us through. This is an appropriation to acquire the compost facility and the transfer station out of the solid waste facility. And it is not subject to a ballot question. Brian?
Thank you, Libby. So as the town manager mentioned, Article 19 proposes apportioning a portion of free cash in the amount of $4,400,000 to fund the acquisition of the composting facility and transfer station at the Nantucket Road Solid Waste Facility. Ahead of a new solid waste services agreement expected in December of 2025, Town Administration's long-term solid waste planning work group assessed these two facilities and concluded that the town's ownership and control of the structures on the site are crucial for ensuring an effective service agreement and for managing solid waste on the island efficiently. This article is in line with the Select Board strategic plan, particularly the environmental leadership focus area. It also aims to implement data-driven recommendations for island-wide solid waste management, emphasizing the importance of sustainable practices and community involvement. Approval of Article 19 allows the town to take proactive steps towards responsible waste management, safeguarding the environment, ensuring a cleaner and healthier future for our community.
Thank
And
you, Brian.
And that's not that's not an appropriation or a vote required for that one because it's free cash?
A town meeting vote is required, but it is not on the election ballot because it isn't seeking additional voter approval through an increase in the tax rate.
Okay, thanks.
So I think that if I'm thank you, Scott, for the reminder. I think we have a couple of more articles to go through that are not appropriation related with our town team. And the next one is Article 38. And our housing director, Christy Ferrantella, is on to take us through that one. Christy?
Thank you. So Article 38 is a result of the housing summit that took place in April of 2023. The Housing Summit, which was led by Housing Nantucket, organized housing stakeholders to address the pressing issues surrounding affordable and attainable housing on Nantucket. Over 50 stakeholders participated in the summit and jointly identified 8 key areas for action. One of these priorities was to explore density increases in near jobs and transportation. Meg Trudell, our senior planner for the town, spearheaded the working group that tackled this focus area. In collaboration with the Planning Board, Article 38 was crafted to enable density increases in specific zones, provided that all units in the development are accounted for on the town's subsidized housing inventory, or SHI list. Specifically, the proposed changes would raise the maximum height allowance from 30 feet to 40 feet in the CMI, Commercial Mid-Island, and CN, Commercial Neighborhood Districts, when 25% of the dwelling units within the structure are eligible for the SHI list. This increase in height would be permitted by right in the CMI district, while a special permit would be required in the CN district. The primary objective of Article 38 was to address the Housing Summit's focus area by allowing greater density in areas close to employment opportunities and transportation. This article had a positive motion from the Planning Board, which was supported by the Finance Committee.
So we were going to discuss this in the next section because we had this one targeted as one requiring extra attention. We have Val Oliver with us to offer her perspective on it. Val, are you there? And can you speak to Article 38?
I'm mute.
We see you.
I'm not muted.
You're what?
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay. It didn't say mute, so I was confused. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm speaking today with 2 different hats on. One, as a person who lives in Mid-Island in the district slated for this increase in density, and as a commissioner who sits on the HDC. The max height of 30 feet has been enforced for many years as a standard practice for the HDC since its implementation in the 1970s. The increase of 10 feet higher buildings, I know, is an attempt to achieve a more compact development pattern for more people and more retail. The concept might solve a schematic formula to fulfill the obligations of the outdated 2009 master plan, but the master plan unfortunately did not foresee, nor could it have predicted, the growth surge this island would face fast forward here to 2024. If every structure in the overlay district can max out at 40 feet, there's going to be a push to achieve this stature for every square inch of every building. In the case of this article, you're promised by right 40 feet. And if you provide 25% of the units will be affordable. This action will change the existing environment to ultimately resemble a metropolitan cityscape. In 2019, the Affordable Housing Trust, I believe, enlisted a architect from off island to do some schematics, and what resulted was, I think, exactly what we don't want to see. It was a round brick building over by the old fire station and no parking. Recently at the HDC, we've been presented with a bunch of housing projects, and they're still in process. They come in, they're anomalous, generic, institutional type structures that do not consider what's in the area. So we think it's not unreasonable to want to preserve space and light between buildings, and also to consider the existing inhabitants, the homeowners in this area, and the human scale. I think 30 feet, which is our height that we have now, can certainly accommodate those desires and remain true to the Nantucket community that already live and work here. A big consideration, this is me as a person who lives in the area, is increased density of cars. The planning board metrics are outdated, and they need to include real-time issues of car and parking. Putting large structures in small space that can't accommodate cars is going to be a real problem. The smart growth principles that are driving the push in density encourage car-free environment, but that is not a realistic vision. The visual modifications to provide for extra cars further alter the character of the area, which is now more residential than commercial. This issue should not be overlooked because it's really a problem now. That what I'm talking about is the cars and the amount of cars in the traffic. And lastly, I'll leave you with allowing 40 feet or 4 stories is not a solution. This will change the island that is lauded for its preservation of its historic character. We have special protections, and we're a national historic landmark as an island. Tourism is our bread and butter. And because of the excellent work we've done preserving our visual history, I think this is a cautionary tale of good intentions that may not lead to a great outcome. So in closing, I'm hopeful before the town meeting, the Historic District Commission, the Planning Board, and the housing folks can perhaps sit down together and come up with a solution that will satisfy everybody's concerns. Let's collaborate. We're all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Christy, I don't know if you have any rebuttal to that or not. If not, we'll move on.
No, I'm looking forward to sitting down and talking with the HDC and planning board.
Thank you. Okay, good, great. Libby.
Okay, moving on to 68 and 69.
Yep.
All right. Article 68 is pursuant to Chapter 67 of the Town Code, which requires that if town property is going to be used for erosion control purposes, approval of town meeting is required, in a nutshell. And 69 would add a new bylaw to the town code relating to the establishment of coastal resilience districts. And this is obviously something that's very much at the forefront of town planning and thinking. And we have our sustainability program coordinator, Vince Murphy, to review 68 and 69. Vince?
Thank you very much, Libby. So I'm going to go 68 first. Last fall, the Select Board voted to work on the Sconset Bluff project to stabilize the toe of the rapidly eroding coastal bank. In reviewing all the legal requirements of such an action, we drafted this article to comply with Chapter 67 of the town bylaws, as Libby just said. This requires a license be voted on at town meeting. The project would build on the existing geotube project from 85 to 105 Baxter Road and expand the works from 41 to 119 Baxter Road. This is a cooperative plan with the neighbors to control erosion for both private property and critical town infrastructure such as roads, town water and sewer, as well as access to the lighthouse. Geotubes are a core part of the plan, with adaptive phases in the southern areas, including core logs and dune management. As there are a variety of components, components in the plan, and the state has a broad definition for coastal engineering structures, this article reflects the variety of coastal engineering structures and also refers to operation and maintenance as an outline and outlines in the project management of the notice of intent of how we will all look after this together. This project is in line with the Coastal Resilience Plan and the Baxter Road long-term plan study, both completed in 2021. Much of the land is town land, and this lease license agreement and issuing the license would allow the project to move forward, paid for by residents, saving taxpayers' funds and reduce the risk to public infrastructure. I can pause there if anyone wants to talk about 68, or I can move on to 69.
Yeah, Vince, we do have somebody to speak on 68. It's Emily Molden. Emily, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So the Nantucket Land and Water Council is particularly concerned with Article 68 as it's written, and will be opposed to it at town meeting. As we've heard, the articles before us, because of the provision in our bylaw, Chapter 67, the management of coastal properties owned by the town, which specifically has a section that states that leasing or licensing any town-owned coastal land to a non-governmental body for erosion control protection purposes shall be subject to approval by a vote at town meeting. The provision was first added to the bylaw by a citizen's article in 2012, where it was strongly voted in favor, and was minorly amended in 2018 by another citizen's article where it was again strongly supported. Article 68 is quite concerning to us, primarily for two reasons. First of all, the article is drafted unnecessarily vague and open-ended. It includes no specific description of what erosion control measures are intended, and it's critically important that the town know what's planned for that beach, and specifically to have that in the article, because every alternative carries with it its own pros and cons and potential impacts. Instead, it essentially is asking the community to issue a blank check for the beach to be utilized for the construction of anything from soft to hard erosion control structures, and even includes bulkheads, which certainly would have tremendous negative impacts if they even could be permitted. The article also has no time frame or sunsetting associated with it. It's essentially completely open-ended, which implies that the town would not have to come back to town meeting for approval of any future changes to the use of the beach. And this doesn't seem appropriate, especially because the town has been working really hard and doing very well to advance the alternative access plans for relocating Baxter Road. So if this gets approved, it would essentially allow this mile-long stretch of public beach to be used for any form of coastal engineering structures without limits now or in the future. The nature of this article as it's written, we're also concerned that without more specificity, and particularly without a requirement to come back to town meeting at any point in the future, when the use or conditions may change, is essentially sidestepping the spirit of Chapter 67 1E, which has been supported by town meeting twice, and which gives Nantucket citizens a voice for what gets built on our beach. Any changes to how the public beach is being used in the future would really no longer be subject to voter approval, and this transfer of authority would remain in effect indefinitely. So we are really concerned about those elements of Article 68 as drafted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily. And Vince, before we go to 69, just a public service announcement here. For some reason, the chat is not working, so people in the audience aren't able to ask any questions. There is an alternative way to ask a question, which is to send an email to gov@ournctv.org. That's OURNCTV.org. And we'll get your questions that way. We apologize for that inconvenience. Okay, Vince, Article 69, please.
Thank you very kindly. Article 69 is a bylaw to have coastal resilience districts for Nantucket. It would effectively make all of Nantucket's islands one coastal resilience district. It would allow the select board to create coastal resilience, sorry, I beg your pardon, I'll step back a minute, and the whole coastal resilience district will be called the Islands Coastal Resilience District. Then within that, it would permit the select board to create sub-districts, mapped sub-districts in anywhere that there was an associated risk with a coastal risk such as flooding, erosion, or the potential that either of those may become worse over time with sea level rise. The initial purpose here is a funding model. This is a funding model to allow people, homeowner groups, or for plans to come forward from the Coastal Resilience Plan to work in small areas potentially for these sub-districts at neighborhood level, at road level, or at small group level to have projects that can get funded and put the majority of the costs back to the homeowners. There would obviously have to be some local incentive for the town to be involved, such as a public access way to a beach, a car park, a road, or other important or critical town infrastructure, so that the town would have an interest in the project. This will effectively work in two ways. The Islands Coastal Resilience District would work something like in parallel and in tandem and in cooperation with capital projects. So it would have to work through that existing program as well. Then the smaller level, the much more granular, where most people will have an interest for their home and their neighborhood and access to keep access to their property, will be the far more frequently used aspect of this bylaw. And anyone that will be a beneficiary will have an assessed value over a set amount of time within a mapped area that they can then understand over time that they will have to pay in order to gain the benefits of this. The other important thing from this is that once you're in a mapped area, it's a huge educational point for the residents that are in that area, people that may wish to buy in that area in the future, and it can serve the real estate community as well with certainty. So effectively, we're looking at how coastal resilience districts and sub-districts, more importantly, can get set up to offset the cost to the taxpayer and, more importantly, benefit all the neighbours in an area where these coastal resilience districts are. The major point in this, and one of the critical parts to understand, is that as districts are set up and the initial building phase is put in place, that there will be a small operational phase afterwards for operation and maintenance. This comes with a far smaller associated cost that we can then understand and include in the maintenance of this area so that it does not fall into disrepair, does not fall out of compliance with any wetland regulations, such as the state wetland bylaw or the state wetland protection, or the town wetland bylaws, and it can remain compliant and operational. It's a mutually beneficial way of looking at installing coastal defences to keep homes and public infrastructure safe and at reduced costs.
Thank you. We have a rebuttal on this one as well. It's by Peter Morrison. Peter?
Thank you. It's actually Peter Morrison speaking as co-president of the Civic League, and it's not a rebuttal. It's an expansion of why I think this is a very important article to pass. The town's coastal resilience plan offers a detailed vision of a way forward an ambitious undertaking that's comprised of many discrete efforts designed to be adaptable to future uncertainties that we all face. The Nantucket Civic League is the umbrella organization for our 25 local neighborhood associations. And as co-president, I anticipate that the members of many of these autonomous neighborhood associations will regard themselves as stakeholders in the town's coastal resilience plan for widely differing reasons, of course, and centered on local contexts. The CRAC has been surveying residents across the island to better understand the concerns of residents in one or another of these 25 neighborhoods. The results are a first step in delineating local communities of interest across Nantucket. In some neighborhoods, it's going to be local flooding. In others, it's erosion and so forth. The proposed boundaries of the forthcoming coastal resilience subdistricts and in the districts themselves ought to align with the local communities of interest within Nantucket Civic League neighborhoods. Common concerns within and across neighborhoods invite coalitions among neighbors who will vote to support specific interventions. For managing severe erosion in one place, recurrent local flooding in another, and so on. The Coastal Resilience Plan will soon embark upon delineating these coastal resilience districts and subdistricts. Essentially, they are small areas where a suitable intervention will address a specific chronic problem. Article 69 is the initial step in delineating where to intervene and how. Our Nantucket Civic League neighborhoods can partner in defining these subdistricts. Our 25 autonomous neighborhood associations and the Civic League's 2,000 plus members surely will regard themselves as stakeholders, and the Civic League stands ready to facilitate and encourage our stakeholders to partner in delineating these boundaries so they can function as communities of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Vince, we did have a question from the audience. Please explain what the cost to homeowners would be and what the impact these maps would have on homeowners insurance.
Don't know that I can answer the insurance question, but certainly the first part is somewhat easier to understand. It'll depend on a number of factors. How close you might be to the coastal risk, say flooding or erosion. I think people understand erosion pretty well. So let's just go with that for the sake of argument. So if you're close to a coastal bank and you're on the bluff side of the erosion, then you might be a primary beneficiary. If you're on the other side of the road, just for the sake of argument, you might be a secondary beneficiary, or if you're a road or two back, you might be a tertiary beneficiary. And then it might depend on the linear feet of frontage or the area of your property. So it'll have to be calculated. There is no way to say that up front, because essentially you have to look at what risk you're protecting from, the time frame, the type of beneficiary you are, and how long we might reasonably expect this to be in place, perhaps upwards of 20 years. So that will all have to work into the calculation. This is very similar to how benefits districts work, with a couple of improvements. So there's already set formulas for that, but effectively you need lawyers to work parts of that out, as well as understanding from an engineer's point of view what the risk might be over time. So there's interesting calculus involved, but the long-term part to understand is that it will benefit you to keep your property in the coastal zone for an increased length of time while working with the town to assist in all of these efforts. It's a net positive.
Thank you very much. Libby, we had on the list Article 42, which was a zoning bylaw amendment regarding flex development and protected open spaces. We were not able to identify a presenter, and I don't know if you're in a position to, either yourself or one of your colleagues there, address Article 42. If not, we do have a speaker. Emily's going to speak on it.
I am not the person to speak on this. Leslie, I don't know if you might be Director of Planning.
Or I can speak on that. So Article 42 is an article that was proposed by the planning board, and it addresses flex developments. For those of you that don't know, flex development is a subdivision option that does not allow additional building lots, but it allows smaller lots to be created in exchange for the creation of open space. So it doesn't increase the density, it just preserves more of the land for open space instead of private yards and those types of things. So this article does not change the amount of open space that is required to be set aside. The percentage that's required in any particular zoning district remains the same. What this article proposes is to allow a little bit more flexibility for the ownership and the management of that open space when a development contains at least 25% of the units designated as affordable on the subsidized housing inventory list. So that's all this is. It's not, again, reducing the open space. It's not eliminating the requirement for it. It's just giving a little more flexibility for the ownership and the management where units are included.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. Emily Molden, if you want to give your perspective, please.
Sure, thank you very much. I'd be happy to. As Ms. Snell spoke a little bit about flex development already, flex development is an important planning tool and a development option that has been used across the state and on Nantucket for decades. And while it does ultimately result in smaller lots, the bylaw clearly does enable a developer to build out bonus lots beyond what zoning would normally allow, contingent upon a number of criteria, including the permanent protection of a percentage of that property as open space. The Nantucket Land and Water Council is extremely concerned about Article 42, and largely those concerns can be expressed through two main points. First of all, the proposed amendment, unfortunately, is just poorly drafted in that it's not very clear what it actually does. The amendment inserts a new subsection into a provision of the bylaw, and the provision reads that a restriction defining the protection of the open space shall be enforceable by the town or county of Nantucket and recorded in the Registry of Deeds or Land Court. In addition, the open space shall be, and this is then followed by a series of options for how the open space can be held and by whom. The new subsection that's being proposed to be added through Article 42 reads, the planning board may waive this requirement for development containing at least 25% affordable housing. While the intention may be to add an alternative for the protection of this open space, which shouldn't really be necessary, it can easily be interpreted to suggest that the planning board may actually waive the enforceable restriction defining the protection of the open space. So in 20 years or even 5 years from now, when these conversations are forgotten and all we're left with the text of the bylaw, we're really concerned that this is not clear. So even if the proposed amendment were interpreted rather in the way that the planning board is intending it by simply adding an additional option, the amendment falls short in identifying what that alternative actually is, what alternative can be used. It's left completely open-ended. If a developer is not going to choose to utilize one of the options that are currently listed in the bylaw, which include fee ownership by either the town or the land bank or another conservation nonprofit, and is not going to utilize a conservation restriction, which already has statutory requirements for who can hold them, there aren't many other alternatives out there other than perhaps some sort of deed restriction, which typically expires in 30 years. And I think it's also important to point out that any alternative entity that's going to be managing this open space really needs to be set up with the mission and the ability to regularly inspect it and enforce these properties. Otherwise, there's little to no guarantee that they'll actually be protected the way the bylaw intends. Finally, the last thing that I just want to point out in light of those concerns is that it's important to note, obviously, affordable housing is clearly a critical issue, but we believe that the element of it in this bylaw is simply misplaced, because given the stated intention of the amendment, there really seems to be no clear incentive or benefit for affordable housing with this amendment. So those are our comments and concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily. I can say that that lack of clarity you referred to is what drew our attention to this article in the first place for discussion. So thank you. That concludes this portion of the forum. We're going to move on to short-term rentals now. And again, with apologies for the lack of ability to use the chat button, send your emails to gov@ournctv.org and we will get them on for you. So next up is the short-term rental issue, which is represented in the warrant by Articles 59, 60, 61, and 62. And to try to aid this discussion, Article 59 proposes a zoning bylaw amendment, and Articles 60, 61, and 62 are all different variations of a general bylaw amendment. Stephen Cohen, the proponent of the zoning bylaw amendment, will present his views and will be followed by Select Board member Matt Fee, and then by Act Now founder Peter McCausland. Briefly, and by way of background, the three general bylaw versions, 60, 61, and 62, were initially sponsored by the Select Board, by Mr. Cohen, and by Michael Kopko, respectively. But those three articles were compromised, in quotes, into one version, which is the version of Article 60 that appears in the final warrant. That compromise was negotiated among the Select Board, Mr. Cohen, and Mr. Kopko. That compromise also included Mr. Cohen's agreement to seek a take no action on the zoning bylaw change, provided there was no adverse court decision issued before town meeting. Of course, an adverse decision was issued, so Article 59, the zoning bylaw change, is now back on the agenda for ATM. So Mr. Cohen, starting with you, can you help the voters understand all this? But before you do that, could you please confirm your status today? As a well-known island attorney, you are representing others. Are you representing others, or are you speaking in your personal capacity? Take it away, Stephen. I see that his little block on the gallery view disappeared. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I was just converted from to a panelist, so now I can talk.
Great.
Okay, great. Hi.
Hi.
So do you want me to talk about 59 and 60 together or individually?
Both of them. We asked you first to clarify your status today. Are you representing somebody, or are you here as your own citizen?
So I am my own citizen. I know that fundraising letters and other letters to the editor have suggested that I am an attorney for someone here. I am an attorney, but I do not have a client in this matter. I'm just a citizen who's involved in this issue. I don't represent Nantucket Together. I don't have any secret clients. I'm just a person.
Thank you for that.
So Article 59 is a amendment to the zoning bylaw that would do essentially three things. It would clarify the definition of what's commercial. Right now, the definition of commercial has a exemption that says it does not include residential uses. And this would add to that rental of a residential property is also not a commercial use. So it says commercial uses do not include residential uses, including rental of residential properties. So that's one thing it would do. The second thing it would do is create definitions for long-term and short-term rentals within the zoning code. Currently, there is no use in the zoning code for rental of a property. It doesn't exist. So the bylaw would create that use as a short-term rental for anything under 31 days and a long-term rental of anything longer than 31 days, with an exception for rentals under 14 days being not short-term rentals to coincide with that exemption in the tax code that people may be familiar with. It would then allow the use of short-term and long-term rentals in all zoning districts except the commercial industrial district. It would require, and then the next thing it would do is require compliance with the rest of the bylaw. In order to be in zoning compliance, you would also have to be in compliance with Chapter 123, which is the town's new certificate of registration program that requires things like having a proper septic system, paying your taxes, following various rules and regulations, and allows the Board of Health to regulate that system. So those are the three things it does. One thing I would note is that it doesn't actually change anything. At the time it was written, it doesn't change anything in the law because it reflected exactly what the town's position was at that time, as determined by the building commissioner, as determined by the zoning board of appeals 4 times, and as determined by in the town council's briefs filed in the various lawsuits that were then. No, we can get into the details of the Ward case or not, but what I would say is that what this also does in reflection of that case is answer the question that's asked by the judge in that case to clarify the point that he thought needed to be clarified. So in addition to clarifying the zoning code, it would also respond to and make the changes that the judge thought needed to be made in that case. So it would make that case a moot point, an irrelevant point, because it would supersede the questions and decisions in that case through a local determination.
Thanks. Do you want to carry on then with Article 60 while we're on it?
Sure. Article 60, I think, is the most, the various zoning articles and bylaw articles that have been passed or that have been proposed have had lots of ways to restrict short-term rentals. And the single item that I think both sides agree on is that there is no desire, and in fact, a deep resistance to having large corporations like hotel companies or whatever come in and buy up houses on Nantucket and run them as short-term rentals. And so Article 60 takes that position that is adopted, that is effectively favored by both sides, and says that certificates of registration for short-term rentals can't be issued to corporations. It does have an exception to allow for the use of trusts or LLCs by natural persons, so that if I wanted to have an LLC for liability protection purposes, but still the underlying owner was me or me and my wife or whoever, that would be okay. But a large corporation would not be able to meet that criteria. It also has a couple of other provisions that would prohibit short-term rentals in affordable housing units, because that was considered to be not a correct use of affordable housing, and also in timeshare units, which are essentially prohibited on Nantucket except for the ones that already exist. So that is what Article 60 would do. Just by way of background, I should note that there were 3 versions of Article 60 that were proposed, one by the Select Board, one by myself, and one by Michael Kopko. And when we got together to talk about how to avoid having dueling articles on the floor, Article 60 was the compromise where we decided that the important pieces could be selected from the 3 articles and put forward as one article. And so that's where you get the current language. So the idea that it's a compromise is that there were three versions, and this is takes the best pieces of all of them.
Thank you, Stephen. Matt Fee, you're up.
No, hi, thank you very much. 59, I don't view, to say some of these articles are select board articles. I think, majority, 2 or 3 of the select board members did push it forward, but I have had concerns about this from the beginning. I don't view 59 as a compromise. I feel it's capitulation. I feel like we're giving in. I think there's various sides to this, but this is, how do I say it? This is taking a sledgehammer when we need a star screwdriver. This is picking one side of the issue and allowing, and giving them everything they want, and not looking at the other sides of this and putting some balance into it. My biggest concern, there are some good things in it, but my biggest concern is placing a Y in the use chart. Once you place a Y and you permanently allow a use, it's very hard to slow that down or stop that later. If we decide we've made a mistake at that point and we try to amend it, the people who are doing it differently than we amended are going to all be saying that it is that they have pre-existing rights, and those are their rights, and they get to do that. I think it's some of the arguments are that it's simplifying things and making it easier. I think in the long term it could make it a lot harder. So I'm vehemently opposed to putting a Y. I think we can define what is accessory use, as the state is asking, in a way that fits with how we do it. And I think so that's one. It's one of the arguments is it's ironic that people are saying we have to go slow and we can't consider other articles. We have to just consider this because we haven't looked at the uses. Well, we haven't looked at the impacts of this because the policy has been set, and without, in my opinion, it hasn't been really vetted. The select board didn't talk about it. It's been a lawsuit it's just something that's there. And so we as a community have to get together and talk about it. You can make sandwiches and cook bacon and eggs. You're not a restaurant. You can listen to music and drink adult beverages at your house. You're not the chicken box. You can clean your car. You're not a car at your house. You're not a car wash. You can have brew beer, in your closet. You're not the brewery. I think that, we have to think about that. My business is a non-conforming use. I know how hard that is. I think that we're not really thinking through what the impacts of putting a Y will be. I think we need options as a community. I think last year's Affordable Housing Trust Fund article was not affordable. The short-term rental work group article was a good article. I think it was supported. I think if it hadn't been amended by the Finance Committee, I think it would have passed. And that was not, that. So I think that what Matt Haffenraffer was trying to do is a similar thought, which is, I think we have to define what truly is accessible. We have to make sure that all pre-existing somehow are allowed, but not unlimited and not forever. And then ensure there's a mechanism to adjust as needed to protect the existing short-term rental owners, to protect the renters, to protect the neighborhoods and the island economy. I think we've got to find a balance, and 59 is not a balance. Full approval, is not full approval of this is not finding a balance. So that's 59. 60. I'm not as concerned. The only question I have there is, I'm not as concerned. 59 needs to be defeated, in my opinion. 60. The only thing I will say is it reminds you of the Stop the Straw campaign. It makes you think you're going to be doing something that's really going to be meaningful, but we really aren't. It's not limiting anyone to anything. I don't know any corporations that don't have natural people as owners or underneath them. So I really, it's doing a couple of good things with affordable housing and timeshares, but it's not really doing a lot. I'm not spending a lot of time on that, but I think it's, it's sort of a little bait and switch. It's a little bit of a red herring of like, oh, if we do this, everything's going to be fine. Well, it really won't. Corporations have natural people behind them all the time. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Peter McCausland. You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. I'm here because I was the only board member of Act Now or advisory member of Act Now, advisory council member who was available. I wish someone else was, because I'm the only one who's not a resident and I don't vote. And my appearance here today, by this appearance, I don't presume to tell anybody how to vote, but I hope that my participation in this forum will help voters understand the issues. I agree with Matt Fee that 49 would be very bad for Nantucket. It would gut zoning, the residential zoning protection that year-round and seasonal homeowners enjoy. It will exacerbate the housing crisis. Commercial short-term rentals have had a very negative impact on attainable housing. We've lost 600 long-term rentals in the last decade, and many investors have gone into mid-island neighborhoods and bid up the prices of houses. So this would even make it worse. It's not good for neighborhoods. It's not good for the community the community needs teachers and people who work in the hospital and in other public services, and they can't find housing. And I don't understand why the people who are pushing commercial interests don't acknowledge this housing crisis. In any event, 59 furthers commercial interest. Otherwise, Mr. Cohen would have accepted Judge Vey's decision. Judge Vey, the land court judge in the Ward v. Grape case, said that commercial STRs are not a legal principal use. And he remanded the case back to the ZBA to determine if there is a customary accessory use of running one's home in Nantucket. The reason he remanded it is because the case was about principal use. But he said he recognized the customary accessory use right to rent, which is in the Nantucket tradition. And another thing I would disagree with that Stephen said, that the law before the land court was that commercial STRs were residential use. That's not true. A plain reading of the zoning bylaw would indicate that that's not the case. When the Styler decision of the Massachusetts Supreme Court came down in 2021, there was a combined select board, planning board meeting that was televised when town council advised Dawn Holgate, who was the head of the select board, and Andrew Vorse of the decision, spelling trouble for commercial STRs. And it was at that meeting they decided to fix zoning. And so over the last 3 years, we've had 3 attempts to fix zoning, and Article 59 is the 4th attempt. And I agree with Matt that once you open the floodgates, then there's no way to undo the resulting harm. Stephen mentioned that he changed the definitions in the zoning code. And as far as I can tell, Article 59, the most interesting aspect of it, it says commercial is not commercial. Well, I think that's confusing. Commercial is commercial. And the idea that commercial enterprises should be operating in residential neighborhoods is crazy. So regarding Article 60 and the restrictions on corporate ownership, our view is that zoning is about use and it's not about ownership. And every time you try to regulate ownership, you create all sorts of loopholes like Matt Fee was referring to. And I think when we talk about zoning, we should always just talk about use. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, Stephen, it begs the question, if 60 passes and 59 doesn't, does that leave problems, or would you be happy with that? Or what does 59 accomplish if you have 60 pass?
Sure. I'd be happy to answer that question. And then if I could also respond to some of the points that were made, that'd be great.
Go ahead. Yep.
So 59 and 60 operate independently. 60 just says that certificates of registration issued by the Board of Health cannot be obtained by certain users, timeshares, affordable housing, and corporate ownership. And I think that there's a general agreement that that is a good idea. It's not a fix to whatever the concerns might be about short-term rentals. It doesn't, it's not meant to be or designed to be, a fix-all or catch-all of whatever those issues might be. But what it is a consensus on what both sides seem to agree would be a good idea. It's just one good idea. The problem that we've had with the multiple zoning articles that have been proposed in the past few years is that they've been filled with what both sides consider to be poison pills, and that's why they keep getting defeated. Both sides have found them to be untenable, and that's why they've been defeated. If 60 passes, it just deals with who can or cannot get certificates of registration from the town. 59 deals with whether or not short-term rentals are properly addressed within the zoning code. So let me try to back up a couple of things. First of all, the idea that short-term rentals are related to it all, or an exacerbation of the housing crisis that we have on Nantucket, is really a sad misappropriation of that crisis. And the people who say it should be ashamed of themselves, because there's no affordable housing that's going to be created by banning STRs or limiting STRs. There's no accessible housing that's going to be created by it. We have $6 million summer homes on Parker Road, Hooper Farm Road, development, and the desirability to be on Nantucket is what's driving up prices. And the average home right now in Nantucket is $2, $3, $4 million. And you're just never going to find the idea that changes if short-term rentals are not available. If short-term rentals aren't available, we will just have more wealthy people competing with each other for houses that are left empty more often. That's the case. It's not as if housing values are suddenly going to plummet and we'll suddenly have accessible housing and affordable housing stock coming into the market. It's nonsense. So, and it's really shameful that people would try to hitch their wagon to that issue. On the issue of the Ward decision, the suggestion that that short-term rentals are commercial use is flatly incorrect, and the judge says so in the decision. So to say that people who show up at a short-term rental do the same things on the property as people who are there at long-term. They live there, they cook there, they eat there, they sleep there, they have fun with their kids there, whatever. Like there's no use of the property that's different or commercial. And Judge Fay recognized that in his decision by saying that it was entirely the wrong question, and that the only issue was whether or not the type of residential use that was being performed was allowed under the zoning code. And he suggested that the transient nature of a short-term rental was different enough than the long-term nature of a different user that it should be expressly allowed for in the zoning code, which is what the Linfield decision also says. And that's what my warrant article at 59 does. It puts definitions into the zoning code that Judge Fay said were missing. Judge Fay said, I've looked through your zoning code and you don't talk about long-term or short-term rentals anywhere. The only mention of it is in passing about how secondary dwellings could possibly be used for rentals, but it's not in the definition of those. It's in language that is not binding. And so that decision says if Nantucket wants to have short-term rentals, it needs to clean up its zoning code. On the accessory use issue, he says that it was not discussed by the building commissioner at that level. It wasn't discussed by the zoning board at that level. So he's not going to rule on it because he's not going to be the first person to get into it. And he sent it back to the town to work it out. So he's suggesting that the zoning code could potentially allow for short-term rentals as an accessory use, but he doesn't know because it wasn't addressed below him, which is fine. The solution that Article 59 does is legalize short-term rentals by creating a category for them in the zoning code so that they are expressly allowed in all zoning districts except the CI district, which is the current case now. I mean, they're actually allowed in the CI district. It would ban them in one district that they're currently allowed. So it doesn't add them anywhere. The idea that this is letting the cat out of the bag or the horse out of the barn or whatever analogy you want to use, and then we can't go back, is not correct. Now, I appreciate that, Selectman Fee is pointing out that once you have something in the zoning code, if you try to change it, that creates a pre-existing non-conforming situation that is hard to get back from. He's right about that. But the part that he's leaving off, and again, this is really like way deep in the weeds legal issues, and I understand why it's confusing for people and outside of what people are willing to take the time to listen to. But the statutory act that was enacted by the legislature that created the short-term rental tax also enabled towns to regulate short-term rentals through their bylaw, not through the zoning code, which means if you put short-term rentals in your zoning code, you can then, which takes a 2/3 vote, you can then regulate those through a 50% vote to add bylaws. So most of what the anti-short-term rental people want to do actually can be done with only a 50% vote through an amendment to a bylaw. And there's an important legal distinction between bylaws and the zoning code, which is that bylaws don't have pre-existing non-conforming status. So if you adopt 59, there is zero risk that you can then not regulate through the bylaw with only a 50% vote, and there's no grandfathering pre-existing non-conforming situation. So people do not need to be scared that adopting 59 is going to foreclose or create some forever problem. That is, it's a complicated legal issue, but it's not true to assert that we can't go back. Once we go there, we can't go back. The issue that Selectman Fee was pushing at the select board meeting last week, and that Peter McCausland is suggesting now, is that, we should just have short-term rentals as an accessory use. It is an interesting theory, except for two things. One, it's not factually true that most short-term rentals are just accessory use, depending on how you define accessory use. If you define it the way they want to, which is that it's to a principal use by a year-round resident. Because if that was the case, then what you'd end up with is, according to the assessor, 7,400 houses on Nantucket that are owned by off-island people that don't qualify for the year-round exemption, and 23 houses on Nantucket that do qualify for the year-round exemption and therefore presumably are year-round principal residences. There were about 2,100 short-term rentals last year. So that means that 7,400 summer homes can't be used for short-term rentals under what they're pushing, and nearly every year-round house would have to be used in order to meet current demand. Now, that's insane. On top of that, the article that Matt was pushing would create a pre-existing non-conforming status for all the existing short-term rentals, all like 2,100 of those, and then create a cap tied to the shy list that is set at about 600 short-term rentals. And that means that there would be no new permits issued until 1,500 houses dropped out of the system so that you got down to the cap. And then you could only have 600 short-term rentals that were primary use instead of 2,100. I mean, again, a little insane, in my opinion. So, I think people should understand that some of the proposals that are being floated out there are solutions in search of problems. and they don't actually work, and they create tremendous other problems. So, there are lots of ways that short-term rentals can and should be limited. And I'm not ever suggesting that they shouldn't be. We should be limiting them for public health and safety. We should be trying to address all nuisances that are created. And I'm all for regulations to do that. If Article 59 is adopted, those can easily be adopted at a later town meeting with only a 50% vote as an amendment to the bylaw. And there already is in place one really key provision that would cure most of those problems, which is that if people don't follow the rules or otherwise cause problems, the town can deny them a certificate of registration. So for example, if you have a house that's used as a party house and causing all kinds of problems, and there's complaints about it, the town can deny them a renewal. So the ability to keep going is the biggest incentive to keep things under control.
Thank you, Stephen. Let's get some other views here. Matt Fee, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Just wondered if you had a rebuttal to all that.
Oh, I don't know if I have a rebuttal to all that. Stephen's pretty eloquent there. I think I do agree with them that puts definitions in. I do agree that we need to put definitions in. I just don't agree with a definition that, makes them all legal. So, he and I can agree there and disagree.
Sure.
Jamie Howarth at town meeting a couple of years ago talked about how no one was asking him for Mid-Island. That was ridiculous. That was like 3 years ago. And then the very next year, he sort of changed his tune and said, yeah, we need to regulate them, and it is an issue. To say that it's nonsense, I think myself is nonsense. What I think Matt Haffenraffer's article was attempting to do, I know what he's was trying to do, was to slow the transition. I'm happy with the 2,000 that are here now. I think what people like myself are concerned about is, how many more, and the transition, all the large lots that are currently workforce and year-round housing, are those all going to be transitioned into this use? And where are we going to, where are other people going to live? I know out here, we are pretending that it doesn't impact housing, but if you do any sort of just a cursory search on Google and look at what's happening in Colorado and other places, they get it. They've seen what's happened. And the same thing is happening here and will continue to happen. So to say that it's, that this has had no impact on housing on Nantucket is just, it's specious. I think, the statutory things, with the bylaw and the statutory is difficult for people to understand and how that works. But town council, has sort of, I'm half right and Steve's half right. And I think I think that's not as clear cut. Like there's nothing to worry about here as he led us to believe. And I think it does depend on the definition of accessory use. I think that, I think that we do need a definition. We need to define that. And so that's my, and the other part, the numbers, there's, 2,100 or so short-term rentals, of which about half are used for over 30 days, half are used less than 30 days. So if there was two classifications of short-term rentals, an accessory classification that allowed everybody to do it for 30 days or less, for example, and there was another classification that allowed existing to keep it, and that what you would find that'd be 1,200 or so that would keep it, and they'd pay a little bit more for their license and they'd do it more full time. I know Pete McCausland's probably having a cow right now when I talk about it, but I think if we want to get something to pass, we need to be thinking along those lines. And we need to, it's not going to make either side 100% happy. So in that number of 618, 619, it may get down to that, but within 4 or 5 years, we would know what the number should be and, how it is keeping our economy strong. And we would, and then we would be making those determinations. But that's different. That's a very different approach than just opening up to everybody. So I would caution people to, I warn people to be cautious. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Peter, I'll give you the last word before we go to questions, but before we
All
do,
right.
that, Charlie, you wanted to pass it there. So this is the email address for you to send your questions. And they'll be fed back to me. Okay, Peter, go ahead.
I would say that to suggest that seasonal homeowners won't be able to short-term rent is fear-mongering. The zoning bylaw in Nantucket provides for customary accessory uses. The Supreme Judicial Court in Styler recognized such a use for communities, and Judge Vey in his ruling recognized that. So there's no fear that seasonal homeowners won't be able to rent. I think Steve was suggesting that he is providing in Article 59 the definitions that Judge Vey was looking for in his opinion. But Article 59 was drafted long before Judge Vey made his ruling. I might point that out. And I'm not ashamed to say that there's a direct connection between housing and the growth of commercial short-term rentals on Nantucket. Our research indicates that Nantucket's lost 600 long-term rentals in the last decade, as I mentioned. But if you there's a 40B development, I think it's called Beach Plum, that's maybe 15 years old. And had 40 units, has 40 units, 75% were at market, the rest were covenant. The vast majority of the market ones are short-term rentals. They could be homes for firemen, policemen, teachers, and whatnot. Regarding grandfathering, I know Matt is big on this, but I think it's fundamentally unfair. I think it's unfair to people who have owned their home for years, whether they be year-round or seasonable. Going forward, they don't get to run a commercial STR. Only the people that have been doing so in violation of the zoning law get to do it. It's unfair to the neighbors who live next door to the grandfather, or, well, it's not even legal grandfathering, but I think it's unfair. Some of the groups that I've been working with this year have indicated an interest in some sort of sunsetting provision that would give commercial operators some time to adjust, find long-term tenants, or sell their properties, or whatever has been discussed, and I don't think would be unreasonable.
Thank you. We're going to turn to questions now. This one is from Kit Murphy. It seems from the beginning of the island's STR discussion through focus groups, surveys, and the working group that lessening the impact of the solely investor-owned, absentee-owned, corporately owned term was a laudable goal. Can each of the three gentlemen explain how the warrant article they are championing impacts this class of STRs currently existing on Nantucket and what it means for these STRs going forward? So I think to boil it down, what do you have? What's the effect of how strong would the effect be of all the provisions on corporate ownership in the bills you support? And we'll start with Stephen.
Sure. So Article 60, the main purpose of that is to limit ownership by large corporations. That obviously would not impact if someone was an individual investor, just for clarification. Article 59 would, I think, also open the door to do that in the sense that if we legalize and the STRs in the zoning code, it then gives us a clean way to regulate through the existing section bylaw 12023, I think it is, for commercial registration. If the town wants to further limit those issues, it could then do so by a bylaw amendment that only needs a 50% vote. So what I'm trying to do in 59 is set the framework so that as any legitimate concerns are identified, they could be then regulated through a 50% vote. So I think a combination of 59 and 60 help with that issue.
Matt, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I addressed this earlier. I don't believe, I believe the way it's written that most, you know, and I agree with Steve that the town could maybe try to do it later, but I think as written, it won't have much impact. I think there's not very many corporations that aren't backed by natural people. If there's a few entities that are, you know, sort of shell corporations, they just put a natural person's name on it. I think Michael Kopko's original article was trying a little more by limiting people to 2, but that was not embraced. I have a friend on the other side who's in the industry. He thinks where we're heading is, you know, there's going to be some sort of real estate market correction, and there's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines, and it's not necessarily just a corporation, it's family money, it's institutional money that is turning homes into a capitalist entity. And I think that, you know, a corporate entity, even if it's not a corporation, it could be a family fund, it could be a bunch of individuals. And so I think that it's something, I think it's laudable, but it's not, you know, 60 isn't getting us there. Thank you.
Peter?
I would agree with Matt that it's be hard to enforce. As I said, zoning is about use and not ownership. And when you try to sort of design zoning for ownership, you get into trouble. On the other hand, there is a lot of money out there. Blackstone and a lot of other big financial firms are investing in residential real estate in all kinds of markets, new developments and high-end markets, so it would be a real shame if things got even worse. My only point is that banning corporations isn't going to help much because the money will find its way in.
Thanks. Matt, this one's for you. No one has explained what 61 and 62 propose, how those are different from 60. Maybe you could ask someone to explain that in connection with the Leslie Forbes question, which is Article 61 and 62, are they still on the warrant and will they be voted on at town meeting?
Yeah, they're both still in the warrant. They would have to be called by, you know, someone at town meeting would have to call them to, you know, to discuss them. I think they've got negative recommendations because they've, you know, combined into one article. So I think someone would have to make a positive recommendation for those.
Scott, I could tell people the difference if you want me to.
Yeah, briefly, sure, that'd be helpful.
So, you know, neither of those are my article, but I know what the differences are. The Michael Kopko's article had a few differences. One is it had no grandfathering or pre-existing non-conforming status for existing corporations. And then it also had a couple of other limitations in it, like you wouldn't be allowed to get a tent permit and you'd be limited to the number of licenses you can get. The town's article and my article were substantially similar, with the idea, I think, mostly being that the town also had the prohibitions on affordable housing and timeshares. So those are the differences. And like Matt said, the other two articles have negative motions, so those would not be heard. Those would likely not come forward, but technically any article could be called.
While we're on this line of reasoning or thought, listening to the select board meeting last Wednesday, there was a lot of talk about a special town meeting inside the ATM. And then there was talk about setting up another town meeting for October. And there were a number of substantive ideas being bounced around about different general bylaws. If 60 passes, is all that off the table, Matt, and we just stuck with 60? Or how do we get to the town? I mean, it sounds like people aren't done thinking about this, and I'm just wondering what's going on.
Well, I think it's 59, I think, is more the one that I have concerns over. But I think I'm disappointed that, you know, that the rest of the select board didn't see the value of giving the voters a choice at this town meeting. I think I think there are some there's some misinformation out there that, you know, that we've got to vote for 59 or else. It reminds me a little bit of last year. We had the linkage issue, and that's the linkage issue was that, you know, people on the side of unlimited STRs wanted to link them, thinking it would give it a chance to pass. And the select board decided to unlink them and made a couple other minor changes based on what, based on discussions with the short-term rental work groups at our meetings over 2 or 3 different meetings. And so, so I think this is a complicated issue, and to address all of the different aspects of it in a fair way, I don't believe is going to be a really simplistic article. It's not going to be as simple as legalizing them everywhere for everyone, or as simple as, Dawn had an idea that we all sort of liked last week, which was limited to, 12 rentals, but then she's, and I don't know what she was hearing from the public, but the public was concerned, oh, that doesn't take care of this, that doesn't take care of that. The short-term rental work group did work on a lot of that. They looked at hosted stays and made allowed hosted stays. They looked at cottage colonies. They made some exemptions to take care of some of those issues. Then the question, are we going to we may have a town meeting called for us. The citizens might get 200 signatures or more, and then we are required to call a town meeting within 45 days. So it may be done for us. Part of why I was trying to open a special meeting in the town meeting was to save the staff from having to have that happen, and from all of us having to meet in June or July or August, 45 days from when someone calls it. I wasn't in favor of setting that date the other night, because I do think that we have to see what happens at this town meeting with 59, and who knows, maybe between now and then there'll be, a meeting of the minds, and something reasonable, can be amended. I don't know, amended to this, that would be acceptable to the, to the moderator. But,
Right.
I think it's an issue that is not going away for a bit, is what I'm hearing. And I think there is a compromise. I think there is a path in the middle, but, and I know that because I have both sides mad at me. So, I know, but people on both sides are not happy with me. So I know that there's a path in the middle. I just wish we'd get there.
You're doing a good job when everybody's mad, right?
Yeah. Okay. They're all mad at me. I'm afraid to leave my house. I don't go and move the bread anymore, but we'll see. Thanks.
I'll read this question from Matt Peel as it's written. Your article essentially unregulates STRs. No regulation leads to market saturation. Last year, we saw a 15 to 20% decrease in STR rentals. And this year, while it's still early, some are seeing a 40 to 50% more decrease. Corporate STRs like the Copley Group are being sold off. How does your article in any way protect the local family or the non-investor owned from market saturation?
Is that directed at me?
It's directed at you. Without identifying the you, but
I think it's me.
I do too.
I guess what I would say is, right now, before the Ward case, short-term rentals were essentially unregulated. And then the town adopted the registration program that says, okay, you have to meet basic health and safety issues and taxation and septic and those kind of things. So they're starting to put some of that regulation in place. And Article 59 just creates a place in the zoning code for short-term rentals to exist, which I think creates a way for the town to then start regulating them by figuring out what the problems are that we want to address and targeting regulations to do that, which I would encourage. I'm not for unmitigated, short-term rentals. If there are problems, they should be addressed. But I think it's interesting that the question both asks, what do you think about unregulated short-term rentals, and then notes that actually short-term rentals are in decline, which I think is interesting. And, we had a huge bounce here because of COVID and then after COVID. And now what we're seeing essentially is that, you know, the bounce is wearing off, or the bubble or whatever it was. And we're going back to a more regular summer, you know, season in terms of volume of rentals. And we're seeing that people, you know, even though there could have been a massive scoop up of short-term rental of houses for short-term rentals, there wasn't. And even though the short-term rent, even though there was a bounce in those numbers, that is declining based on economics. Short-term rentals as a business strategy doesn't work. And there are a number of other people that have done the math, and I'm not going to do it here for you now, but it is too expensive to buy a decent home on Nantucket and then short-term rent it. There's no profit in it. The only real way to make money on short-term rentals is to already own your home at a lower carrying costs. So the short-term rental fear is really should be that people who own them are going to use them that way, not that people are going to buy them. If you buy it at $2, $3, $4 million or more, it doesn't make any economic sense in current market conditions. So I think that both that the market is showing that the fear of massive short-term rental increase is not true, and also that if we adopt 59, we can easily put in place through the bylaw with only a 50% vote any regulations that we need that address actual problems. Thanks.
Question from Ann Dewis. Mr. Cohen, could you estimate the current percentage of STRs that are corporations and would be prohibited going forward? What about other legal structures that are used by investors to own Nantucket real estate strictly for rental?
Sure. I don't have that number, but I have heard that number is something like 2% or 5% or some very, very small number, which again goes to show that it's not really a problem, I think. But if we were seeing 50% of these were owned by big companies, I would say that would be a problem I'd be really concerned with. I just don't see that issue. In terms of, so what was the second half of the question?
What about other legal structures that are used by investors to own Nantucket real estate strictly?
So there are essentially two. One is limited liability companies, which are essentially where natural persons use these companies to create liability protections, which I think is a smart thing to do. You don't want to have your personal home, your business, your families, your whatever at risk over these issues. And I don't know that really creates any difference. If people had to do it individually, they could. It's just a liability shifting issue. And then some of them are sometimes in family trusts and those kind of things. And that, again, really doesn't change anything, but it creates a situation for estate planning purposes where, for taxes and those kind of things, but it doesn't really change sort of boots on the ground about what's happening.
Thanks. Gail Walker, do we have any more questions? I think we covered them all.
Hi, Scott. So we don't have any more questions about STR articles at the moment, but there was one question that came in late about Article 38.
Is our Article 38 person still on the, Christy, are you still there?
Yes.
We finally got a question for you. In reference to building in the new downtown, why would one want to allow 40-foot high buildings in Mid-Island, an area where the scale is 1 and 1.5 stories, and in an existing rural neighborhood? Kind of a loaded question.
So the question is asking why we would want that in the commercial Mid-Island.
Yes, the new shopping mall.
So this was part of the work group that had a lot of kind of housing stakeholders talking about what were different potentials. And this was kind of pre me onboarding into this position. So I don't know the exact details, but I know that in those discussions, they felt that this was a good neighborhood that could have a higher density with things being closer to employment, transportation, sewer and water. And that made the most sense for the density. I think Leslie is still on this and may be able to jump in as well.
trying.
Hi, Leslie.
There we go. So the planning board proposed this to allow for more flexibility in design for buildings that contain at least 25% of the units designated as affordable under the subsidized housing inventory. So this doesn't automatically allow across the board up to 40 feet in height. The HDC still has their full jurisdiction to review the design and to say, you know, that height is out of place in this location, you need to lower it. So the 40 feet is under zoning, but the HDC still has their jurisdiction. And this isn't an area that's rural. This is the Mid-Island. It's full of commercial and other residential type development. And as Christy said, that's where, you know, sewer and water and public infrastructure is all available. Under the zoning bylaw, we have a town overlay district and a country overlay district, which has been broadly supported by the voters at town meeting. And the bylaw for the town overlay district specifically talks about future development taking place in the town overlay, where infill development should be encouraged. And that's what this article is attempting to do, to direct affordable housing to the Mid-Island and to provide incentives for people to create it. And we keep talking about affordable housing, whether it's related to short-term rentals or just affordable housing in general. So here's an option for people to consider, you know, to encourage it.
Thank you, Leslie, and I appreciate you hopping on like that right at the end of the presentation.
Scott, it's Matt Fee. Can I make a comment too?
Go ahead, Matt. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I think the other reason to do it, if we wanted to replicate downtown in the Mid-Island, we wouldn't be able to. Our zoning is, as it sits now, is currently sort of a suburban commercial zoning with, you know, parking all around it. And I think, you know, when we drive around and we say, geez, it doesn't feel right, it's because we've got one of the finest examples of what, you know, of a commercial downtown in the world. And I think, you know, maybe it's not 40, maybe the HDC will find it to be 36, 38, but I think buildings that are close together and tall, fronting the street, really nice walkable roads, I think it is, you know, planning should be praised for trying to do that in this case. I know they've been beaten up a lot lately, but this is something that they really are doing the right thing on, trying to do the right thing on. And I think we should support them and, you know, and count on the HDC to do it. And the other part about it, we don't need to park every single car. Make it really nice. You know, we don't have to build parking lots. It isn't what downtown is. Put on street parking. So copy what works already. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Val, you have your hand up.
Thank you.
Val, I can't hear you. Are you muted?
Unmute there. Okay, sorry. Cars really is the biggest concern for me. You can't get around it. Build housing without putting in enough parking is irresponsible. I am so sorry to say that, but it's true. And having cars park along the street is going to just create more and more problems in an area that wasn't planned to be this way. Now, I know in 2009, they decided to make it this way, and I get it. It has the sewer, it has the water, you know, all of that. But I think there needs to be a little bit more paying attention to the transportation part of it. And yes, it's a lovely thought that everybody will walk around, but everyone on this island uses the Stop and Shop. It's not just, you know, and they're not going to walk here. So parking is really a big concern. And, you know, Matt's right. We've tried to show some of these developers town is our go-to. Like, look how nice that looks. It's too expensive. They don't want to build it like that. They want one big massive box, as generic as possible because it's cheap. So it's going to continue to be an issue. And I wish that there wasn't such disparity between the HDC and the planning board. So I fail to understand why they keep pushing this height thing without us all getting together, but maybe it will result as because of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Peter, did you want to say something?
I'd just like to respond to one thing that Stephen said. He said that short-term rentals have been unregulated on Nantucket, and that's just not true. The zoning code bylaw regulates short-term rentals, and in residential districts, only certain uses are allowed, and it specifically says that all others are not allowed. There is a provision for customary accessory uses in the Nantucket zoning code, and he mentioned timeshares. Well, in a timeshare, the person occupying it has some sort of equity interest in the timeshare. And Nantucket was smart enough to outlaw them in all districts, I think, except 2. And then it was only by special permit. So they were very interested in this transient use of a single family dwelling, interested enough to regulate timeshares. So to say that short-term rentals have been unregulated, and this is a whole new thing that Nantucket has to deal with, there's never been anything commercial allowed in residential districts in Nantucket. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's it. This has been a great forum, and I want to thank our speakers very, very much. It's great of you to put your time and effort into this. A public YouTube video of today's forum will be released later today for on-demand viewing, and we'll advertise the link to encourage further viewing in advance of the annual town meeting. And NCTV 8 will be rebroadcasting this forum very frequently in the weeks ahead. So with that, I would like to bring this to a close, again, with the thanks from all of us here at the Nantucket Civic League. Goodbye.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.